My name is Peter McLinden. I am the Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Cincinnati AFL CIO Labor Council. On behalf of President Bill Fraley, our Executive Board, and over 105 union affiliates in our council, I thank you for joining us today in this important Zoom meeting, a question and answer discussion between labor leaders and elected leaders about how to reopen the American economy in the right and responsible way. As we've all witnessed and experienced over the last several months, our country's economy and workers have suffered greatly, dealing with the devastating consequences brought on by the COVID-19 crisis, which is causing the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. In some ways, the pandemic is showing the greatest strengths of the American worker in our labor movement, especially how frontline and essential workers are making daily important sacrifices to keep us all healthy, safe, well supplied, and providing vitally important public service during this crisis. Unfortunately, the pandemic is also showing the many inequities of our society, the weakness of America's social safety net, and the failed leadership and misplaced priorities shown by President Trump and his administration. As labor leaders and elected government officials serving others in the time of crisis, we truly understand the proverb that with great power comes great responsibility. Currently, the discussion and the debate in this country is focused on how we should reopen the American economy and society in a safe, responsible, and right manner. The National AFL-CIO recently issued a document entitled A Working People's Plan for Reopening the Economy the Right Way. This document describes the necessary requirements to keep our workplaces safe, protect the rights of all working people in this country, and to not only overcome the COVID-19 virus, but prevent any resurgence. Several national unions, including ASME and CWA, have put forth a document entitled America's 5 Economic Essentials. These are essentials that must be included in the next phase of the coronavirus relief. This includes keeping America healthy, protecting and expanding health insurance and keeping our hospitals insolvent, keeping frontline workers safe and secure with more PPE equipment and testing, keeping workers employed and protecting our pensions, keeping state, local governments, public schools, and the U.S. Postal Service solvent, and finally, keeping America competitive by reinvesting in infrastructure and creating jobs. Subsequently, as we've seen last week in Ohio, the state just recently announced details of its Ohio's Responsible Restart Plan, listing the responsible protocols that all Ohio businesses must meet when reopening. This plan also includes mandatory and voluntary guidelines for certain industry sectors to follow, including consumer retail, manufacturing, construction, general office workplaces, healthcare, bars and restaurants, barber shops, and hair salons. These documents may be downloaded at the state website, corona.ohio.gov. And now, it's my great honor to welcome a great friend of labor and the most important advocate for working families in Congress today, United States Senator Sherrod Brown, who will share some opening remarks. Good morning, Senator Brown.
Peter, thank you. And Bill Fraley, thank you. And Tim Berg, I know, is on the call. And thanks to the elected officials that I've been talking to pretty regularly during this, Denise and Cedric and PG and Kathy and Cecil and others that I don't know if they're on the call or not, but Bridget, I know, is, I believe, on the call too. Thank you for, but most importantly, thank you for the activists in the AFL-CIO and in our community. And it really is, I mean, this is obviously the hardest thing anybody's ever done and that we've done in our lifetimes in this country, to figure out how to get people back on their feet and to take care of them in the meantime, and protect, especially protecting workers, something that this country frankly hasn't done very well. Let me give you first a brief update. I will be brief overall, but let me give you a brief update. I speak to Governor DeWine and Dr. Acton, the health director, pretty much about every week. They've done generally a good job on this. I think Dr. Acton thank God that the Governor DeWine is listening to his doctors around him. I like to say that what Governor DeWine's done aggressively addressing the coronavirus pandemic early, recognizing it, and moving quickly has saved lives in Ohio. I'm equally certain that what the president has done, first denying that it was even a crisis, let alone a pandemic, then the wrong-headed way he's done this has clearly cost Americans their health and their lives in far too many cases. And that's, again, why the labor movement's so important. So what Congress did about 5 weeks ago, let me just go over with a couple comments. First, the $1,200 per person plus $500 for family member. In some cases, the Treasury Department and the President's Treasury Secretary has done generally a pretty inadequate job, as has the Secretary of Labor, in getting the benefits out. Some families got the $1,200 but didn't get the $500 per child. So if that happens, you should call John Ryan's on this call, former head of the Cleveland AFL, runs my state operation. You should call him or our Cincinnati office of Leah there, and we will help you with that. It put significant. We want to make the next round $2,000 a person. I want to do it quarterly so that people have a little bit of revenue coming in if they're laid off. Second, we got significant money to hospitals. And nonetheless, some hospitals have laid off. I'm talking to hospital administrators around the state, trying to encourage them to keep people. Into some hospitals, the executives have taken a pay cut to keep people on board. We're obviously encouraging that. The third thing that may be the most important that Tim Bergen knows a lot about is how we got $600 federal unemployment benefits for people laid off. Now, this is something to share with your members and share with people on this call, that in many cases, Ohio's unemployment, in large part because we've had a pretty conservative anti-labor legislature, unemployment in Ohio, the benefits have shrunk. They're a shorter period of time than they used to be, and fewer people are eligible. So if you're self-employed, if you own a barbershop, say, or if you're part-time, or if you're a gig worker, you're not eligible under Ohio unemployment, but you're eligible still for the federal. So, but you have to file with the federal, with the state unemployment bureau. The problem has been the Secretary of Labor, who was Trump's nominee for the Secretary of Labor, is a former corporate lawyer that that spent his life trying to bust unions. He has been not cooperative at all in getting this money out. It's now been 5 weeks, maybe 6, since the president signed the bill. And we're pushing them, and we're pushing on the state. The state is overwhelmed with unemployment, obviously unemployment filings, but most people still haven't gotten their $600 a week. They will back pay you on this, and you will get it starting from the day you were laid off. And it will go till the end of July. One of my top priorities is extending those unemployment benefits, because it's not like all of you in this call and other people in your locals are going to get called back to work, all of you, by then, obviously. So, but make sure you tell people they have to file, even if they're not eligible for the state. They get the federal. If they are eligible for the state, they get the state and federal money. We had $10 billion for child nutrition programs. We've got to do better there. I hear in calls, I mean, a lot of us on this call, I know, we're talking to people all the time. And I'm hearing all kinds of stories about people that are going hungry during this. You know, the $1,200 doesn't go very far. They haven't gotten their unemployment checks. They're not getting help other ways, and they're hungry. We know what's happened at food banks. We've got to keep doing that. And last, and I've worked with Denise ad nauseum, can I say, on this, we're pushing to get more federal dollars for state and local government. I mean, my big concern is, as people are going back to work now, one of the concerns, and you know, there will be people brought back to work as DeWine opens. I hope he opens it a little bit more cautiously, but as he opens the government, the economy, I'm concerned that if we don't get help to state and local government, there's going to be a whole nother wave of mostly union layoffs in state and local governments. And that would be tragic, because people can't get the services they need, whether it's police and fire, whether it's taking care of food stamps, or any number of things, child support, all the things that cities and counties do for people. So and then the last thing is, we have a temporary moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. That's not good enough, because if you tell, if you're a renter and you're you get a break so that they don't evict you when you can't pay for 3 months. The problem is in month 4, you have a balloon payment and then you're evicted. So I'm leading the charge in the Senate on upwards of $100 billion to get to renters and to people who face foreclosure. So they don't have this balloon, they don't get evicted and they don't have this balloon payment. You know some of the numbers before the coronavirus. That 25% of renters in this country spend more than half their money on rent and half their income on rent. And that's tragic. And it means that one thing goes wrong in their life and they're evicted. And we've got it. We just can't let people, and PG and I have talked about this, we can't let people get evicted in the middle of this crisis. So we have a lot more we have to do. And here are the 2 things that I wanted, that I really want your help on. And I know the National AFL is really very engaged in this. We want the emergency work standard, the emergency safety standard through OSHA. OSHA clearly we don't have a very aggressive OSHA now because Trump's so anti-labor, but we're pushing administration to issue an emergency standard requiring all employers to protect workers from exposure. When the president ordered the meatpacking plants to reopen, without saying you've got to protect the workers and you got to protect the food supply, it was damn near criminal. The President of the United States puts that order out there. He won't put an order to get more safety supplies and masks and gowns and gloves. He won't do anything on that, but he will order these plants to open and put literally tens and tens of thousands of workers around the country in jeopardy. They don't slow the lines down. They don't make workers stand further apart, and it might mean they're a little less productive. But he has not been willing to do that. So the emergency standard, we say to all these workers are essential, but somebody said to me in one of my calls, if we were essential, they would protect us. If they're not protecting us, then we're really expendable. And that's really the administration's attitude about this, that workers, that if we're not going to protect these workers, we can't open the economy up without protecting workers. The second thing we need to do is to pass our premium pay bill. That should be part of the Recovery Act, where workers who are on the front lines, and it's doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists and all of those people in the hospitals, to be sure, but it's also the Kroger worker. It's also the bus driver in Cincinnati. 35 mostly union bus drivers have died in this of coronavirus around the country. We've got to have protections for, we've got to have the protections for the bus drivers and other workers, but we also should have pandemic pay. They're mostly low and moderate wage workers. They're mostly women. They're a higher percentage of the population of people of color. And they make $10, $12, $15, $18 an hour. They should be getting pandemic pay, which would add to their wages up to $13 per hour. We ask them to work. We ask them to protect us. We call them essential. Then damn it, we ought to treat them that way. And that's a big battle to try to get McConnell and Trump on board. So far, Trump and McConnell have resisted. Keep the pressure on. Some people in this call live in Kentucky. I assume all of you know people in Kentucky. Keep the pressure on McConnell. He's on the ballot this year. He's been an enemy of working people his whole life, but he might listen a little more now. He's going to listen to local government calling him off when he says that let these governments go bankrupt. And now he's saying you need corporate protections on liability before he'll give money to local governments. You've got to put the pressure on him and on Trump. So the biggest, the most important things we do are requiring OSHA to issue this standard for worker safety and to provide pandemic pay. If we do that and get the money for local and state government and in eviction, we do that the next round, it will matter so much in people's lives. So thank you all for weighing in. So many of you in the labor movement have been on some of my calls and given me good advice on what to fight for and how to do this. I've been with Kathy and others on what's happened in our schools with distance learning, and with so many kids on the other side of the digital divide. There's so many things we need to do. So thank you, and Peter and Bill and Tim, thanks for doing so much in the labor movement, and we need you now more than ever. So thanks so much, everybody.
Well, thank you, Senator Brown, for your leadership and your kind words, and keep up the fight. And,
For
we'll
sure. Thanks.
stand behind you and with you all the way through. So our Zoom meeting roundtable panel today brings together elected officials representing city, county, state, and national offices with labor leaders representing workers in several important industry sectors. So I'd like to welcome the following leaders: elected government officials, Councilmember P.G. Sittenfeld, Board President Denise Driehaus, Hamilton County, Ohio House Representatives Jessica Miranda, Bridget Kelly, Cedric Jensen, and Kathy Ingram, Ohio Senator Cecil Thomas, Congressman Tim Ryan from the Ohio 13th Congressional District will join us around 11:30, and John Ryan, the State Director from U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown's office. And representing labor, I'm proud to welcome Tim Berga, President of the Ohio AFL-CIO, Melissa Cropper, President of the Ohio Federation of Teachers and the Secretary-Treasurer of the Ohio AFL-CIO, Bill Fraley, President of the Cincinnati AFL-CIO and Business Manager of the Plumber Pipefitters Local 392, Michelle Thoman, President, Registered Nurses Association at UC Health Medical Center, Matt Alter, President of the Firefighters International Association of Firefighters Local 48, Ted Thompson, President of the National Association of Letter Carriers Branch 43, Sean Grayson, President of Ohio Council 8, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, President Kevin Garvey, the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 75, and Troy Miller, President of the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 627. So our question and answer format will be moderated by Doug Bolton, President and CEO of Cincinnati Cares, a nonprofit started in 2017. Cincinnati Cares uses a market-leading platform to connect businesses and volunteers to opportunities where they're needed most, and to design and implement better volunteer engagement for a more equitable society throughout Greater Cincinnati. And finally, before we begin, I must thank and give kudos for the organization, planning, and conducting of today's meeting to Brian Griffin, our Director of Communication and Technology, and Julie Johnson, our Political Coordinator. And a final special thank you to the state reps, Miranda, Kelly, Ingram, and Denson, for allowing us to use their Zoom time meeting format in their weekly lunch legislative time slot. So sisters and brothers, I now turn over to our moderator, Doug Bolton.
So good morning, everyone. It's good to see so many of you, and Peter, thanks for the introduction, and Brian for the invitation. Some of you I've connected with in my career as a media guy, so reporter, editor, publisher of the Business Courier for 20 years, and then ran a big commercial real estate services firm. But the common theme across those 40 years in business in Cincinnati has been how important the labor movement is to our region and to our community. What I'm doing now in terms of representing the nonprofit sector, the 650 nonprofits who keep our community thriving through providing programs and services, obviously relies on a lot of you from volunteer perspective. So thank you for everything that each one of you do to help our community and to keep our nonprofits thriving. It's cliche to obviously talk about how impactful the COVID-19 pandemic has been to our nonprofit community. But you all see it, you know it. Senator Brown was talking about the impacts, and so everything that you all are doing to not only getting Ohio and this region back to work, but also the things that you're doing to help our community survive and thrive through this disaster. So my role is as traffic cop, and I usually do this in a live event. So I'm obviously this is a new territory for all of us in terms of participating in this kind of thing. But hopefully you'll excuse any of the faux pas in terms of not being able to just turn to someone and say, please answer this question. So let's go ahead and get started. Troy Miller from the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 627 is going to ask our first question, and then Denise Treehouse and PG will offer our first answers to that question. So Troy, I actually can't see you on any of my screens, so hopefully you can either unmute yourself and kick us off.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Good. Last week, Governor DeWine released a response to the Restart Ohio plan to protect the health of the employees, the customers, and their families, restart Ohio's economy during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Under this plan, facial masks are mandatory for workers, but only voluntary for customers, with the state allowing local governments and businesses their discretion to pass rules and regulating customers to wear masks, with customers coming close together on buses in retail stores. How do you feel about passing rules requiring customers to wear some type of facial protections? Thank you.
All right, Denise, you want to tackle that one first? Make sure you unmute yourself.
Thank you for that prompt. I would have been talking to no one. So thank you all for having me on the line. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have to jump off on the hour. But in response to the question, remember that the governor said originally that he was going to require masks. And then the following day rescinded that and said, oh no, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to do that. It's going to be optional. And so, you know, while I agree with Senator Brown that the governor and Dr. Acton have done a pretty good job of getting us through this and having people abide by the rules that they have put in place for the health and safety of everyone, I was disappointed in the reversal on this one, because my belief is that the decisions have to be driven by public health and data and not by politics. And I think that is true of every decision that is made. And you see it obviously playing out at the federal level, but now a little bit of it playing out at the state level as pressure mounts from the other side to get things open without so much of a regard for the safety of not only the customers coming in, but the employees in any facility that people go into. So I have checked in with the health commissioner here in Hamilton County. We only have limited authority. And so I feel like it's on us as communicators for, in my case, the county, to remind people that, look, you know, and we just did this at one of our briefings, actually, because we had an incident where 100 people gathered at a raceway. They were not standing apart from one another. They were not wearing masks. And or first responders had to be called in because there was a fire created by a car crash. So not only were these folks endangering themselves, but also the emergency responders then were endangered by their behavior. And then they all went home, and then they went to the grocery store, right? I mean, it's not as if people are operating just amongst themselves and their families. And so then we're all at risk when people behave like that. And so I have tried to impress upon people that if you're not doing it for yourself because you just don't feel like you're going to get COVID-19 or suffer a negative health consequence there, the people that you encounter are at risk. And their parents or their grandparents are at risk. And so the elderly population in particular, I'm very concerned about. So we've been trying to talk about this at these briefings. And I don't want to say we're trying to shame people into good behavior, but we're trying to remind them that good behavior, it goes like this, right? And it affects everybody. And so what affects our behavior should be public health data and not our political affiliation.
Thanks, Denise. I know since you have to leave, I'll let PG answer that question, but I also want to have you and PG address a question that we got from the audience, which is kind of broad, but I'll let you take a shot at it, which is what's the basis that we should open up Hamilton County and Cincinnati? So think about that, but first let's go to PG specifically around the question of masks. PG?
Sure, thanks, Doug. And I saw a signal flash across my screen saying my internet connection might be unstable, so you can glare at me if I cut out at any point. But Thank you to all of our partners, our great friends in labor for organizing this. Special shout out to Michelle Thoman and the Registered Nurses Association. This is National Nurses Week, and all of you are on the front lines, but our nurses have proven especially heroic during all of this. So the city of Cincinnati as a jurisdiction does have the authority not to be less restrictive than the governor's orders, but to be more restrictive. So we could mandate people wearing masks in retail situations in public, and I support it. And I want to just be clear about why, because I think this is the thesis that all of us need to drive home. We are all eager as hell to reopen our economy, but we cannot have economic health if we don't have public health. And I just want to share one quick personal story. I had a craving for a Grater's ice cream cone, and as I see my friend Sean Grayson, I don't want to get into Jenny's versus Grater's rivalries on this Zoom call, but if I had less restraint, I would have just stayed home. But I go to the Hyde Park Grater's to get an ice cream cone, and I walk in. There's a sign on the front door that says no more than 8 people inside the store at any given time. There are clear markings on the ground so that people know how to social distance. There are 4 people behind the counter, 4 employees behind the counter. They're each wearing a mask. I'm wearing a mask. And in addition to getting my Grater's fix, that interaction inspired confidence, right? And if our consumers, if our customers are scared, it doesn't matter if these orders are lifted or not. We need to do things as local government that put business in a situation, in a position where they can succeed because people think, I'm going into a safe circumstance. So, I would like to be, no more heavy-handed than we need to be. But I think to let people know when you go out and you are being a good customer, you're going to be safe. I think some of these protocols, especially early on, are going to be necessary, and I support them.
Excellent, thank you. So Denise, just real quickly, any broad, the basis for reopening Hamilton County and Cincinnati?
Yeah, so we were pretty quick to shut down. And we're going to be pretty slow to open back up. When we shut down the administration building, the courthouse, and remember there are other elected officials that are making some of these decisions. We tried to make them all in coordination with one another. We had to remain open to the public because construction went forward. Some of these businesses who rely on the county for planning documents and zoning and all that kind of stuff. So we had one window on the first floor that had plexiglass, and that you could access that window through a hole. And that was other than obviously internet access and phone access, that's how we were. So I felt like it was a good measure to protect employees and the public from catching COVID-19. We are still closed, by the way, to the public as of this moment. We will gradually start to open back up. We will do it very deliberatively. We will do it as necessary. But I can comment that the courthouse right across the street is going to start to open up, and they are requiring masks for everybody in the building. And so, and we have internally required masks for everybody. If you go outside your office, you have to wear a mask. And it's to keep ourselves safe and the people that we interact with safe. And so, look, I agree with PG. We have to make sure that people understand the health benefit of that. And as much as we can, take control of what we can do to require masks in this building, for instance, and then encourage people that are not under our jurisdiction to do the same and remind them about the health benefits of doing so. So, but I like to say about the county, we're slow movers, and in this case, it's a good thing because we'll slowly move to open. And I want to give a shout out, Melissa Cropper, I don't know if you can see that. It's also Teacher Appreciation Week. So nurses and teachers, it's like our favorite people week here. So yeah, that's my response. Thanks, Doug.
And I can second that. I'm married to a teacher and my daughter is a nurse. So PG, 60 seconds on the basis for Cincinnati opening, and then we'll go to Bill Fraley.
Yeah, so I'll say this very succinctly. One, I think in the chat button, I'm going to circulate a Washington Post op-ed by fairly nationally renowned doctor. I am pessimistic about where we as a country are going to be in 4 weeks. I think that people are not handling this thoughtfully enough at this juncture, and I think we're going to see surges. I mean, if you took away New York City, the numbers are already rising basically every place that's not New York. So it's not as simple as, do we open, do we not reopen? It's how do we actually do it? And that's where there's a smart way of doing it, right? Masks are smart, social distancing smart. The two questions I want to raise, and I would to all of our friends in labor say these are things we need to figure out. Imagine if you're in a situation where you're saying, okay, you have to wear a mask, but what do you do in a restaurant circumstance, right? It's hard to eat my ice cream cone if I'm wearing the mask the entire time. So enforcement is another issue. We don't want to be in a situation where we are doing enforcement with egregious disparities. We're not looking to be punitive. We're not looking to put people in jail. We're looking to protect people's public health. So I think, yes, we need to reopen. We have to reopen, but it's 100% in how we do it. And the final thing I'll just say to Sean and to the other folks from AFSCME on the line, I've been joining most nights of the week with community councils. And one thing I ask every time I say, has anyone's trash been picked up any less regularly or any less well than in normal times? And every single community council all across the city has said, even in a global pandemic, we wouldn't know any difference. So in terms of local government being open, just an enormous shout out to our frontline workers who, in a very difficult situation, they're doing the sanitation runs, they're making the fire runs. So I think that sense of normalcy has been heartening.
Excellent. Let's go to Bill Fraley for our first question for our state leaders. Bill, make sure you unmute yourself. There you go. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody being on the call. And my question is, to reopen the American economy safely and responsibly, most experts and leaders agree that there must be massive increases in both PPE, which is personal protective equipment, and rapid and reliable coronavirus testing. Unfortunately, as of late April, Ohio is the 43rd ranked state in COVID-19 testing, far below the national average. What can the state of Ohio do to help businesses get more PPE and to provide adequate tests to keep our Ohio workers safe?
All right, legislators, I know we don't have time for every one of you to weigh in on this question. Who wants to press the button first and unmute themselves and take this on? All right, Bridget, I'm not seeing anybody, so I'm going to call on you. Bridget, unmute yourself and answer that question for me.
Sorry about that. I apologize. So first of all, thanks so much for having us today and for including us on this call. I mean, I think sort of the foundational problem with the lack of testing is that we don't even know how big the problem actually is right now, because there has been such a failure in terms of access to testing. So to Councilmember Sittenfeld's point, I think part of the challenge with reopening is it's going to look like there's a surge no matter what as testing becomes more available, because we haven't been able to test people. So when meatpacking plants are forced to be open, we don't know how big of a problem that is, because there has been a total failure. So the DeWine administration has released new priorities in terms for people to be tested, but they're constantly revising them because people don't have access to testing. So I really think that that is a failure of the leadership at the federal level. And we're really fortunate to have people like Senator Sherrod Brown fighting for more tests and more access to tests, so we can make sure that people who live in our community are safe and healthy.
This is Senator Thomas. I had problems unmuting my phone. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was hitting buttons and man, nothing was happening. Well, I think first of all, we voted yesterday in the Senate Bill 310. Senate Bill 310 would allocate 350 million, I believe the number was, will allow us to allocate 350 million that comes from the federal government to the various municipalities the smaller counties, I should say, counties with a population of 500,000, less than 500,000. Those counties will get a disbursement to be divided among them of $350 million. It is designed for a coronavirus relief fund that the various counties will be able to use for buying personal protection equipment and things of that nature The larger counties, there's 5 larger counties, they will be getting, and I believe Senator Brown somewhat touched on it, there was $778 million that will be divided among the largest counties above 500,000. And those counties are Franklin, obviously, Hamilton. There's several. There's Franklin, Hamilton, Montgomery. Oh God, you guys, you're killing me.
Cuyahoga
Cuyahoga, absolutely.
and Cleveland. Or I'm sorry, Columbus.
Columbus. Well, anyway, I'll get back to them. But yet and still, there'll be 5 counties, and Hamilton County will get a share of that money. And it's going to be kind of the formula similarly used for the local government fund disbursement. And that money will be, again, allowed to be used for personal protection equipment. The other thing that we're focusing on at the state level, businesses, because the federal government has been somewhat limited in their support going forward in some of the other areas, the businesses in the state of Ohio are beginning to step up. And the state is in support of businesses and helping them to begin to make the equipment themselves. And we're seeing a significant amount of support in that area from businesses. So we have these public-private partnerships where we're stepping up with these businesses so that we will not be caught in this situation again. And I think that these are a couple of things that we're doing to address this question.
All right, thank you, Senator Thomas. Let's now go to the next question from Kevin Garvey. So Kevin, make sure you unmute yourself. I will also point out in most people's computers, there's a chat button in the middle down at the bottom. If you would like to send a question, it would be best if you send it to me, so Doug Bolton. You can send it to everyone, but I'll try to pick that question up if you have a follow-up question to anybody. So Kevin, let's go ahead and go to your next city-county question.
Very good, Doug. Thank you. Hi, guys. Everybody doing all right? Good to see everybody. This question is probably going to go to PG and Denise. So under DeWine's restart plan, retail and services will reopen on the 12th. If businesses can meet mandatory safety requirements for customers and employees, for example, limiting the capacity to meet social distancing standards. So, however, without further guidance, the state is allowing the businesses to determine the number of people in the facility. And here's an example. Our friends at Kroger are limiting one customer for 120 square feet. But you take a marketplace that's 120,000 square feet. That's 1,000 people in the store. So you couldn't get 1,000 people in a Kroger store with a shoehorn. It's not a real limit of capacity. So I guess my question would be, would you support state and local rules to do real limit customer capacity in retail facilities based on occupancy or fire codes, things of that nature?
So PG, you want to take that first?
Sure. Succinctly, I'll just say yes. Again, I mean, until we are on the other side of a vaccine or antibody testing that's much more proven out than what we currently have, the only reason we haven't seen massive surges in Cincinnati and Hamilton County in the state of Ohio isn't because our science is saving us. It's simply because we are keeping apart from one another. So Kevin, I think it's a great question. It's a great point. And I am proud and kudos to Mayor Cranley. I think we were one of the very early cities in the country when people kind of thought, oh, that seems like a weird order to say when you are out in public, whether you're in a park or a retail situation, you need to stay 6 feet apart. And, other people have been heroic in this, Kroger cashiers, the folks who are stocking the aisles there. So yeah, I mean, the notion of, jamming 1,000 people into Kroger just doesn't work. We need to make sure that we're limiting folks to keep people distant enough apart so they can be safe. And that's another thing. I think that's actually easier to do at the local level, even than insisting on masks from everyone. Again, the enforcement piece will always be there as a sort of a tricky component, but we have to do it, and I do support it.
Very good. Thank you.
Denise, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I also support that. And it's Kroger has done a nice job of it, as have other particularly small businesses, in trying to limit who's in those stores. So it'll be on the health department, by the way, to enforce. And so we had to make sure that the city and the county health departments have the resources and the manpower or woman power to respond to any complaints that we get related to the lack of safe distancing. One other thing, just very quickly about PPE, the county is rolling out a plan. We're in the process of doing it actually right now, related to the CARES Act money, and that was what Cecil was referring to. Because we're so large, over 500,000, we already got the money, and so a large tranche of that money will be going to PPE. We're purchasing it ourselves and pushing it out to hospitals, first responders, and others on the front lines. And then we're also putting a big tranche of money in there for testing, working with the Health Collaborative to make sure that as we reopen, we've got both the PPE and the testing to go along with it.
Excellent. A question that we received before today's event, but from some attendee, was about city county opening of pools, playgrounds, parks. So PG, Denise, do you want to kind of talk about that, kind of following in line with the respect to the retail question?
Sure. Yeah. The bottom has fallen out of our economy. More than 30 million people have lost their jobs. It's not without dramatic and unfortunate consequences to the city budget. We're facing the biggest operating budget shortfall in the history of the city. And I mentioned that to say that something miraculous would have to happen for our pool offering to be what it normally is. So I fear that even though they are important and I've always supported them, some of those services aren't going to be part of what the city can do this coming summer. I will, however, say relative to parks, while we probably are not going to be able to afford the programmatic piece of our parks offering, I think just keeping them open and maintained is vital, especially when we think about folks who are living in more dense housing. They might not have the luxury of air conditioning. We can't say, stay in your sweltering, cramped apartment all summer. That's just not realistic. And I do think at a time when people have been kind of, sequestered, having safe, maintained green space is actually really important, not just for people's physical health, but for their mental health. So, the city has prioritized police, fire, public services, and health. Obviously, to me, the fifth thing there actually is parks, because, people are going to go crazy if they don't have that as an outlet. So our parks will remain open. Pools will almost certainly be closed this summer.
Very good.
Yeah, the county doesn't have any rec centers or pools, but we do have parks, and our parks are open and they're free. And I assume they will remain so.
Excellent. So let's go to our next question from Tim Berga. Tim, make sure you unmute yourself and take it away.
Thanks, Doug. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, and thank you, Executive Secretary McClendon and President Fraley, our elected officials and our labor leaders. Very important forum you're pulling together here today, so appreciate it. For the state legislators, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the value and indispensability of our workforce in ways that are often overlooked or taken for granted. It has also exposed the inequity that persists in society and how so many working Americans are living on the edge of sound health and economic well-being. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, over 1 million Ohio workers have filed for unemployment compensation. Starting this week, the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services is asking employers to report employees who don't show up for scheduled work so they can be denied unemployment compensation benefits. We're concerned that a narrow policy that fails to spell out good cause exemptions will exclude many working people who have justifiable reasons for not returning to work. As a labor movement fighting to protect all workers, the Ohio AFL-CIO has communicated to the governor's office that safe workplaces, the susceptibility of worker as defined by CDC in contracting the virus, and daycare are all factors to be considered. Recognizing the ongoing COVID-19 crisis we're all facing, what standards or rules should the legislature or administration adopt to protect the workers' unemployment benefit rights?
This is Senator Thomas. I'll chime in on first of all. It's absurd to think that your state will end someone's unemployment and tell them they have to go back to work without knowing whether that business has provided the necessary safety requirements so that that employee can return to work safely. And to say to that employee that if you don't come back to work, you will lose your unemployment, that is totally out of the question as far as I'm concerned. Every business, you have to provide the proper safety equipment and everything else that's there that's needed for that particular employee. And I would be more than willing to present legislation to that effect. But under no circumstance will you knock someone off their unemployment because the employee said, well, I'm going to open back up because the government said I can open up. But without the proper inspection to make sure that they are providing the proper equipment, then there's no way that that employee should return to that business, and under no circumstances should they lose their unemployment.
Very good. Bridget?
Yeah, I'd love to chime in on this. Also, I mean, I think, first of all, underfunding and challenges in funding for unemployment has been an issue for decades, not totally dissimilar to funding for public education. But I think we see too often, this is another example of when those negotiations happen, that it's often proposed that workers bear the brunt of the changes, whether it's through less time, more stringent regulations, you name it. And so I think when we're in the middle of a global pandemic, it's not the time to even attempt to shift the burden to workers, which is wrong in good times and certainly wrong now. And I think as Senator Brown pointed out at the beginning of the call, the legislature has not substantially invested in ensuring that people have the protections that they need when they are unemployed. And I think that the pandemic has just exacerbated that and made it even more obvious, from everything to how long it takes for the system to work. We know the system is overloaded, but we've also had decades worth of time where we didn't properly invest to make sure that we had systems that worked so that they were available to people when they really, really needed them. Families were struggling before this pandemic, are really, really struggling now. And so I think we have to make sure that people have access to the unemployment benefits they need. And even though it's a challenging economic time, we need to continue to talk about the fact that there are too many people in our state who are working for wages that are not sufficient to take care of their families. So if you have families, good stable jobs and good stable incomes, it helps to make life better for everyone.
And can I chime in real quick before you go to the next? This situation reminds me of 2008 and 2009 when we had the crisis back then, where they said, well, the big businesses are too big to fail, too big to allow to fail, so they bailed them out. And I think this is a teachable moment, not for anyone on this call, but for those in our legislature, as well as those in our business community. The bottom line is this: it's the backbone of this country is what we're seeing now in our workers. The workers on the front lines of doing the things they're doing, such as the nurses, those folks working in those food plants and all of these things, they are too big to fail. And I think this is going to be a teachable moment, hopefully, for all of them to recognize that we got to do our corrections from the bottom up, not from the top down. And this is just a moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. Let's go to the education question from Melissa Cropper. Melissa?
Hello, and thank you. And as I address this question to our legislators, I also want to say thank you to our legislators who are on the call, because you all have always been such strong supporters of public education. So this shutdown has certainly highlighted all the inequities in our education system that we've been trying to raise awareness around for years. And also, we know that with this shutdown, our students are going to come back to school with actually more needs than they've had in the past. Yet this week on Tuesday, the governor announced that he's cutting $300 million from our K-12 system and another $110,000 from our higher ed system. at the same time that we have had, frozen foundation funding for this biennium, and at the same time that vouchers continue to go out to private schools. So my question to you is, in order to ensure that we're not forfeiting the future of our children, what are you willing to do or to promote to increase public education funding in Ohio during this pandemic?
Jessica?
Thank you for the question, Melissa. And this is, of course, one of the biggest topics, other than our amazing workers on the front lines, that we will need to address in the state legislature. 300 million cuts to our foundation aid payments is a large pill to swallow for those of us that work and advocate for public education each and every day. So there are some efforts, bills that have already been drafted, because we have been working on public education for some time before this crisis even hit. And then there are further things that we can do to offset all of these cuts and ensure that our kids come first and that they're getting the education that they deserve. Because let's all be honest, remote learning is fantastic, especially during a crisis like this, but it is no replacement for classroom learning, having the teacher there right in front of you. So again, Teacher Appreciation Week, shout out to all of our amazing Ohio teachers. We appreciate you today and every day, and especially during a crisis like this. So I'll just throw out some examples. A quick plug for my great colleague, Representative Bridget Kelly, for sports betting, because if we made that an option here in Ohio, a portion of those funds would go back to education, that we could ensure that that would be so. So that's a great thing. Also, we need to look at the rainy day fund. Also, we need to look at increasing the lottery fund allocation. We need to seek additional funds in other places too. And there's a lot of numbers that I could throw out to you that I have written down here on my index card, but just keep in mind to all of the advocates on the call and all of our brothers and sisters in labor that the CARE Act will appropriate a certain number, $30.75 billion for state schools and colleges. Of that, Ohio will receive roughly $105 million from the Governor's Relief Fund, which can be allocated at the governor's discretion. So I say that to say, please continue the pressure on the governor on how important this is for Ohio and for the children of Ohio, so that we can ensure these funds get allocated in the right way, and that your state representatives on this call and further across the great state of Ohio can fight to allocate these funds where we know we need them to go, so that we can continue to provide quality education to all of Ohio's students.
Very good. Catherine Ingram, we have not heard from you, and I know you are a huge advocate. So,
and I'm one of those people, I probably could have responded on everything, but I've learned to keep my mouth shut because I'll go on and on. But thanks, Melissa, for the question, and shout out to our teachers, since it is Teacher Appreciation Week. The thing that we have to concern ourselves with mainly is, where does the money go once we get it? Making sure that as Rep Miranda alluded to, is that when the governor gets the money in, how do we use that? Now, he's already said he's not going to use the rainy day fund for this budget because there has to be a budget correction. When we'll be back in Columbus to do that, I'm not certain, but we'll have to do it before June 30. My concern is that not only are these kids going to have the usual summer slide, they're going to have the COVID slide. So you put the COVID slide on top of summer slide, and we need to concern ourselves with not only where money needs to be spent in the summer, but also where money's going to have to be spent in the fall. How do we catch these kids up? I know that Rep Miranda's working on eliminating the third grade guarantee. We're trying to fix the report card and all of that stuff. This becomes an opportunity to make some corrections. As Melissa alluded to, we've known some things for years. There were inequities, and we need to take this as an opportunity to correct some of that stuff. As far as funding goes, we have to look at where we're spending the money. I know some districts across the state that are going to be okay in the fall with their cut. Their real hurt will be next year and the year after that. And you've got districts that don't have bond issues, tax levies that they've been able to pass. They're not going to be able to pass them. So looking at a tax increase is not going to help. That is just not going to happen, because it's all coming from the same people. So I think that as far as funding goes, we'll have to look at waivers from the federal government so that there are certain dollars that we are expending that will not have to be spent in this upcoming year. And also looking at our alignment with higher ed to make sure things like College Credit Plus and all of those things are working properly, because right now school districts probably can't afford to spend dollars on textbooks, college textbooks at that, for some of their students. So we have to look at where the money's really being spent and allow the folks on the ground to be able to make those recommendations as to how we make some of those changes and how we spend the money that we do have while we're in the process of getting more revenue in. So it's a tricky kind of thing, but it has to be done. We have to take advantage of the opportunities that are here.
Very good. Thank you, Catherine. Let's go to our next questioner, Sean Grayson from Ohio Council 8. Sean, make sure you're unmuted. Looks like you're still muted, Sean.
There we go. There we go. Thank you, Moderator Bolton. Thank you also to Executive Secretary Treasurer McClendon and President Fraley, and to all of the elected officials on the call. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your good work. My question is, by passing the COVID-19 relief bills, the federal government is providing significant economic relief to several important segments or sectors of our economy, including small businesses, healthcare, and transportation, as well as to unemployed workers. However, many state and local governments continue to lay off and furlough workers as they struggle to provide and pay for desperately needed frontline public services, such as public safety, water, sanitation, trash collection, and healthcare services. How should the federal government assist state and local governments in the next COVID-19 relief bill? Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. And I believe we have Representative Tim Ryan on the line. Tim, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent, great.
You hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, I appreciate it. And thanks for the question. And let me just first say thanks to all of our labor leaders. I've just over the past, couple of months watching everything go down, and now we're having a conversation about local governments and layoffs and police and fire. And we're talking about teachers, and I saw Melissa and then we're talking about our frontline healthcare workers and our nurses. I'm having some nostalgia from the SB 5 campaign, which brings up a lot of good memories for what can happen when working class people come together with a deep appreciation for organized labor. I saw my buddy Timmy Berga on here earlier. You guys are the best, and I just want to take a second to say that how much I love and appreciate all of you. And what's happening now across the country, I think, is an opportunity. And I've been trying to talk about this as much as I can, an opportunity to just ignite organized labor again. And everybody's getting reminded of why unions exist. And all of us have known that for a long, long time. But I think there's an awareness at the Lowe's and Home Depot and Aldi's and Mark's and all of these grocery stores, like the risk that the workers are taking. So anyway, I just wanted to make that plug that I think we've all got to really, in a vigorous way, talk about the power of organized labor, not run from it, but embrace it and try to take it to the next level. With regard to the local and state funding, like you all probably paid very close attention to what Mitch McConnell said in the Senate about letting states and localities go bankrupt. That is not the position we need to be in. That is a right-wing Koch brother, Mercer family attempt to give haircuts to all the pensioners in these states, take a whack at public employees. The local governments would then have to renegotiate contracts with police and fire. And so that's the ultimate goal. We know they have this long-term agenda, and they wait for a crisis to come in and and take a whack at working class people and dismantle the New Deal. And this is an opportunity that I think Mitch McConnell revealed when he said that. We need to, we saw the cuts that came a couple days ago, both in healthcare and then the education cuts. And I was going through the list of how some of these school districts are getting hit, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the school district. This is where the federal government has got to step up and inject money into the states. It needs to look a lot like 2009 and 10, where there's a state stabilization fund. It needs to increase the direct money for local communities through the Community Development Block Grant and allow them the flexibility that they need. We tried to, in the first CARES Act, for example, Eileen Shapiro, who's the county executive in Summit County, which is Akron, she has $80 or $90 million that she can't spend for public purposes, for lost revenue. And we tried to work with McConnell. I know Sherrod was working hard on this too, to get the Senate to pass something in that bill that they had started a couple weeks ago, to just not even new money, just allow them the flexibility. That, and they wouldn't allow it. And that is how committed they are to squeezing public employees. And so we need to act in a big way. You can bet that the House version of the bill coming, hopefully in the next week or two, is going to have a significant investment into our state and local governments. Again, they're trying to drag in the pensions and some of the pension issues that some of the states are having. But at the end of the day, that's an excuse not to help state and local governments. And I just believe that if we can put this SB5 coalition together again in places like Ohio and other places, that we can not just win races and not try to influence policy, but completely create an America 2.0 post-corona, where the workers are put in the middle of all of these issues, and we make policies based on what's going to help the workers, not what's going to help the people. Let me just say one last thing, because I'm really pissed off about this. The idea that we have 35 million people have filed unemployment in the last few weeks, and at the same time the stock market has had the largest growth it's had since the Great Depression, is an absolute illustration of how disconnected the stock market is and the wealthiest people in this country are from what's happening in the rest of the world. I mean, when you think about that and you use that as an example of what's happening in the United States, that all these guys are still able to make all their money, and meanwhile our folks can't even get an unemployment check, and they've been waiting weeks to get it. I mean, we got to hammer that idea. And anyway, this is part therapy for me too, being on here with you. So I appreciate y'all listening.
Happy to be part of your social distancing therapy session. So thank you. I know we lost Senator Brown, but I think John Ryan, his state director, is on and wants to tackle that question as well. John?
Good afternoon. And I also, as others, thank the leaders of the Cincinnati AFL-CIO and the state AFL-CIO for the work, not just today, but pulling together workers who are able to talk about what effect this has on the community, and especially funding for local governments. And as Representative Ryan had said, the senator really pushed hard on just flexibility. This will be a major push in the next stimulus. The senator has been in discussions with your terrific county commissioners down there and county commissioners around the state, and it's a unified message that whether someone's a Democrat or Republican, people understand that we need to have the federal government step up at this time and help with these essential services. There's a lot of talk about bringing business back, but if we don't have the support for them through the communities, through public safety, they're not going to do so well. And so we understand Ohio is especially hard hit with the loss of wages that affect especially cities, and sales tax that especially affects counties. And the senator's been listening in these tele-roundtables, both leadership workers. The one other thing I'll just mention is the senator just is so appreciative of so many union members, some not, who are working every day, whether it's picking up the garbage, if it's keeping these parks open, providing public safety. The work that workers have been doing has just been fantastic. So we thank them for all that, and the teachers and the work they're doing, and especially the nurses and the other health professionals. So thank you.
Thank you, John. We'll come right back to you but first this question from Michelle Thoman, Registered Nurse Association at UC Medical Center. Michelle?
Hey there, everyone. I wanted to say thank you to Bill and Pete for inviting me to participate, and to all the elected officials for taking the time today and really showing through your work the support you have for labor and for workers. So in order to keep workers and the public safe and lower the spread, the possibility of a resurgence of COVID-19, experts are recommending that employers utilize contact tracing tests and then subsequent self-quarantine of infected workers, and that the federal government should develop and oversee a system of reporting and tracking infected workers. So my question is, what should the federal government do to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of contact tracing tests and tracking worker infections?
John, I think we'll go back to you for this question. Make sure you unmute yourself. There you go.
This is an area that the senator's really been very vocal about, because this president has just lost so much time in making sure we do the testing and we do it well. He had a company called U.S. Cotton brought forward probably 5 or 6 weeks ago that was willing to help with had the ability to provide the cotton swab needed for some of these tests. And the only place they said that this cotton swab is made that could be used for this is one company in Maine, and everything else offshore in China or India. And this was done, and people like, people on this call here fought against these issues. People like Tim Berg have fought against on a trade issue, but it's also a protection issue. And the senator's been really pushing hard for the president to use the Defense Act to make sure that that we're able to move businesses to be able to produce this type of testing to protect workers. And it's so different than what this governor did to protect workers and protect people early on, shutting down government, and on the same side, the president just hasn't moved in this way. And so I think this will be one area that the senator has a lot of other senators pushing on this. I know that Representative Ryan and others in the House have been pushing for funding on this, but now we need to move to technology to be able to provide this protection. And we also need, on the same side, the nurse didn't mention this, but the senator just did a tele-round table with a number of nurses and other professionals and support staff in the hospitals, and PPE equipment just needs to be out there in a bigger way than we've seen so far.
Very good. Congressman Ryan, on the contract tracing issue.
Yeah, let me just add to that. Again, Sherrod, obviously, he's our guy, and he's been a huge leader on this. I think there's obviously it's investment. We're way behind the 8 ball on this thing from the very, very beginning. And it's about, I think there's an opportunity here for a jobs program as well. And you've heard people like Bill Gates and others talk about this. How can we get people trained up and put them to work around this contact tracing? Why not use this as an opportunity? And again, there's labor, organized labor, progressives, Democrats, however you want to say it. I think we need to be leaders on these kind of things. Like, how do we put people to work? How do we train them up? How do we create jobs in the middle of this global pandemic? And there's an opportunity for us to do that. I think this also speaks to something that we've been talking about, and John just mentioned it about, one company in Maine and the rest of the companies are in other countries. We coming out of this coronavirus, not even out of it, but like now, we've talked about the Defense Production Act. We've been begging the president to take control of the supply chain to make sure we could manufacture this stuff here in the United States and ramp up manufacturing here in the United States and put people back to work. He's been reluctant to do that. I don't want to get into all that, but he has. And I want us to put together a package of, because I think this has pulled the veil back a little bit on the erosion of the industrial base here on the PPE. So how do we have low interest loan programs, grant programs, and other incentives in the tax code to do public-private partnerships for us to reshore to be able to make ventilators and PPE. But then that also plays into the defense industrial base. How many component parts in the supply chain to actually produce products or raw materials that fund our own military that we've let go offshore? So how do we put a real package together to say we're going to start reshoring some of this stuff in the United States? And whether it has to do with testing, PPE, defense industrial base, let's start creating a culture of reshoring and doing public-private partnerships to make that stuff happen here in the United States. I want us to be talking about that because there's a hell of an opportunity. I mean, how many people did you talk to that said, I can't believe we don't have enough ventilators. I can't believe we don't have enough goggles or gloves. And so the opportunity is here now for us to talk about this and really help other people understand that all of this offshoring has decimated our ability to make things in the United States. And then if we're going to reshore, how do we drive that investment in the communities that have seen lost jobs and lost wages over the past 30 years? I mean, to me, it makes all the sense in the world. It's a simple solution. It's public-private partnerships, and it's an opportunity for us to take this stuff to the next level. And you're also providing some employment.
Great points. Thank you, Representative Ryan. Let's go to
Let
Ted
me,
Thompson.
if I may, let me say a little something. As of this morning, there is a link. This is Representative Ingram. There is a link out. They are hiring. The state of Ohio has started hiring for tracing folks as well as tracing supervisors. And so that is out as of this morning. So the application is taken online and they're taking them for all over the state. So that's out as of today, folks. So that's there already. And if you need, we'll try and get you the link to that.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's go to Ted Thompson for a question about the Postal Service. Ted, make sure you unmute. There you go.
Everybody hear me?
Yes, fire away.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead and echo that of my colleagues. I want to say thank you, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to be here. With that said, much has been discussed on postal finances for quite a few years now, but the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated postal financial situation issues. Meanwhile, postal workers continue to provide essential and critical mail services, working on the front line to keep our country connected and supplied with vital necessities, particularly critical to rural areas, small towns, small and medium-sized businesses, the elderly, military veterans, many of who work for us. These shipments can include anything from medical prescriptions to lab tests, protective equipment, benefit checks, medical supplies, and especially to those who cannot get out to these things from whatever other means. However, the Postal Service, and this constantly keeps updating based on this pandemic, is expecting shortfalls in the multi-billions. Currently, right now, that's sitting at a $14 billion shortfall just for this year, caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and the drop in first-class mail volume. While the pandemic has created an increase in parcel revenue, it is nowhere near offsetting the loss in the volume of mail that we otherwise would see. Now, just recently, Trump named a new postmaster general who may be looking at going to anti-worker or pro-privatization efforts. So my question is, what should or what will the U.S. Congress and Senate do to financially stabilize the U.S. Postal Service and continue to support its dedicated workers during this pandemic and beyond?
So I think I just have time for one of you to respond. So Congressman Ryan, do you want to take that question? And apologies, John, in terms of running out of time for both of you to weigh in on that. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. I'm sure I speak for Sherrod on this as well. Is that we are deeply committed. We understand everything that you just laid out. The fact that UPS and FedEx, they don't go everywhere. They get to pick and choose their routes. And I know in the House package for sure, want to make sure that we take care of this shortfall. We also know there's issues around pensions. And then I think most importantly is what we're talking about, potentially mail-in voting in the fall. And clearly, again, the president will telegraph, his political ambitions, and he's trying to, muck it up with the Postal Service, fraud around mail-in voting, cause all kinds of controversy around the Postal Service, so that it will somehow cause chaos around the election, of which he thinks he can operate in a positive way or have an excuse if he loses, and all of this other stuff. So we are committed to you. We appreciate you. We know how dangerous it is. Again, you're on the front lines as well. And I know Sherrod and myself and the other Democrat members of Congress in our state are deeply committed to helping you. We appreciate you. Please tell everybody how much that we appreciate them, and we recognize you. I mean, you outlined that the drugs, the prescription drugs, the checks, all the needs that people have. You guys are on the front lines of that, and we appreciate that, and we're going to continue to work for it. So keep your eye on the House package. I can't promise in the Senate because McConnell and Trump kiboshed it. We tried to help you in the last package, but we're going to keep fighting for you.
Great, thank you. So let's go to Matt Alter with the International Association of Firefighters. Matt, make sure you unmute yourself and ask your question. So I don't see Matt, so let me go ahead and ask that question. So in Ohio, many essential workers have become infected with the coronavirus, including frontline public safety employees. In some states, virus-infected workers are denied worker compensation claims and other benefits because it's argued that they cannot meet the burden of proof to show that they contracted the virus at their workplace. To protect workers, how can we ensure that COVID-19 related worker comp claims will be covered and employees will not be penalized or required to burn through their accumulated paid leave acts? So Cedric, why don't we go to you? We haven't heard from you so far. So Cedric Denson, how about answering that question for us?
Yeah, I actually want to kick it over to my colleague, Rep. Miranda, to start this one off.
Okay.
Thank you, Doug, for the question. And thank you, Matt, and everything you do and the firefighters across our great state. I just want to say, first and foremost, simple answer is that we pass common sense legislation that our members have introduced in the State House, which is the presumptive coverage various bills that we have. But to expand a little bit, our workers need, and especially during these times, deserve presumptive coverage. Presumptive coverage would mean that workers would qualify for workers' compensation because the presumption is that the disease was contracted at work on the front lines. So an example of this would be a grocery store worker. So shout out to UFCW and all of your fine members out there on the front lines, making sure we have our food and our sustenance during this crisis. But, a grocery worker contracted COVID-19 and applied for workers' compensation. The presumption would be that the virus was contracted on the job, and therefore they wouldn't have to prove that they contracted this at work. Simple answer, pass bills like this that we have introduced at the state level, so that we can ensure workers are covered and therefore their families are taken care of when this crisis strikes. So with that, I'll kick it back over to Rep. Denson.
Thank you, Rep. Miranda, and thanks to everyone on the call, and thank you for the question. Everything that Rep. Miranda said is correct, and I want to take the time to highlight one of our own that is on with us today, and that is Representative Kelly, who actually has a bill that is out, and that's House Bill 605, which gives grocery stores and food packing and processing facilities access to workers' compensation if they contract COVID-19 while on the job. So the reality is when we talk about all these kind of problems that are going on that we've all mentioned today, is we've got to follow up with some action. And so we are lucky to not only have Rep. Kelly, who has a bill out that would cover and protect our workers, but there are a number of other bills that I'll share with Brian that he can post somewhere where everybody can go and look more into it. But that is just an example of how we have something there that we could be moving on right away. So as you continue to see us go back to the legislature and start working on things, these are the kind of things that we need to be getting ahead of and not trying to chase problems, because we're having the conversations and we know what is and may come. And there's some things on the table that we could push and pass right now that would make sure we're protecting everybody. So again, that's House Bill 605. And kudos to my colleague, Rep. Kelly. And I know our caucus is pushing hard to make sure that we're getting these bills out of priorities.
And this is Senator Thomas, real quick. When you got first responders, you got nurses, you got police officers, firefighters, and so on. When you got those individuals on the front lines, that it's unconscionable for me to think that if one of those individuals contracted the virus, then there's going to be a debate as to whether he contracted it at home or on the job. That's unconscionable. We have to recognize that this is uncharted waters for everybody. And those that are on the front lines, there should not be an argument. And I would be the first to present legislation to that effect, saying that first responders, if you contract the coronavirus, you will be provided your compensation for that. Simple as that.
Thank you, Cecil. So we've just got about 4 minutes left. So last question. I will note in the chat function, make sure you pay attention to the 2020 census is still hiring. You know, Catherine talked about the contract tracing hiring going on. The census clearly is still in need of workers. So the last question: in the state health director's May 1st stay safe Ohio order, any public or private gathering of 10 or more people is prohibited unless the activity meets exemption requirements specified by the order. What milestones or achievements do any of you believe need to be met before large gatherings can begin in Ohio? And so anybody can chime in on this question.
I'll go. This is Bridget Kelly. I think that there has to be greater access to testing, because until we know who is ill or who has been around folks who are ill, appropriate testing and tracing has to exist, as well as access to personal protective equipment for the folks who are continuing to work throughout this pandemic. Thanks so much.
And I guess my thought is this: if wearing a mask is the method by which you can't transmit it to someone else, if you're going to be in a large gathering, everybody has to wear a mask. That way I can't get it from Bridget, and Bridget can't get it from me. You know, we got to use some common sense. Use all the necessary protective devices as possible and move forward. I think we'll be okay if we just require the mask, which is what the governor did at first, and then he backtracked.
This is Rep. Ingram. I just want to comment for a sec. The reality is that's going to be so tough to do. Folks are gathering in mass already, whether we know it or not, and they're well beyond the 10. The difficulty is how we carry out making sure that people are not gathering right now. If we get to the point where they want to do 100 people, it's still going to be, can we require people to protect themselves? I have folks right now who are arguing that they really want to have a bigger graduation. And when the governor backtracked on some of what he said the other day as far as graduation concerned, that makes that really very strange for how we're going to move forward. So I don't know. I think it's something that I think that if the parks say you must wear a mask, if you're out there and you're going to do a flying pig run or something like that, that it's going to have to be done on an individual basis. Because I'm going to tell you, I was uncomfortable at the State House on Wednesday. We were there, and 3/4 of the Republicans were not wearing masks. And so already that's shameful. So what are we going to do with that other than making sure that the governor does things that are sensible and listens to what's going on as far as our health is concerned?
Well, thank you, Catherine, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill Fraley to make some closing comments, and all of you, thank you for your participation in today's program, and stay safe and healthy. Bill?
Thank you. First, I want to thank you in particular for being the moderator for this event. Great job. And with that said, on behalf of our executive board here in Cincinnati and the over 30,000 plus union members that we represent in our labor council region, we want to say thank you to all the labor leaders, our elected officials that are on this call today, and to the folks that are listening and online to this panel for your solidarity and leadership. It's greatly appreciated us. Thank you for leading us all through the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Stay safe, and together, community and labor, business, we will get through this, but we've got to do it together, and we've got to do it the right way, and we've got to do it slowly. So thank you all. Have a great weekend, and take care.
All right. Take care.